Good morning. I am here today to tell you two true stories about the power of love to help heal human illness, to help mend disastrous marriages, and to help all of us lead more optimal lives. In addition, I'm going to leave you with 2 pointers that you can take home with you so that you can make every day of your life more pleasant and more fulfilling. They're easy, they're quick, and you can remember them. I am a clinical psychologist. I am also an interpersonal architect. I help people redesign the space between them so that it can work better. And in that role, I got to know Clem and Marie. Here you see Marie shaping her view of her relationship with Clem. You can see how her hands are folded. You can see Clem's hand on her shoulder reaching out. This is one of the photographs by Nicholas Nixon, the wonderful photographer, and appeared in a New York Times Magazine article about my work. In the next photo, you can see Marie with her hands on a pillow. It's a little hard to see. She had her hands on this pillow for the 3 years of treatment with me, with Clem in the room, and with a group of other people. And the reason was that she was ashamed of her body. When the rest of us looked at her body, it looked fine to us. And you can see Clem looking a little bit helpless. This couple came to me and said, "We have had a wonderful courtship. We have lost the ability to love each other in the way that we need to. What can we do?" And so we began. The first thing that we did was to look at how clinically depressed Marie was, deeply depressed. She would stay in bed for a number of days at a time. She had trouble taking care of some of her children. And she was really seethingly angry. And when one sat in a room with her, her anger would sort of go like this. And you didn't want to be on the other end of that seething anger. It was really pretty hard. And so we began. The first thing we did was to help her adjust her meds because of the depression. That helped. The second thing we did was that I reviewed some of the literature on positive psychology. And positive psychology is a relatively recent branch of the social sciences, and it gathers research which helps us live our lives better, basically. It helps us understand what's successful. And I chose 2 things, one of which is much harder than the other, to get them started. And the first thing I chose is that we know that happiness, in addition to involving a sense of meaning, also is actually a frequent collection of happy moments or pleasurable moments done day by day. That's what it is. And so I asked them what they liked. And I know that Marie likes her garden and Clem likes his boat and they like to take walks. And so they began to do those things so that we could rebalance the amount of pain that was between them, and they could learn to rethink how to add meaning to their days. The second thing that I asked them to do was much harder. One of the things that happens when couples begin to have a tremendous amount of trouble is that touch, which always starts out as pleasurable, otherwise people probably wouldn't marry, begins to be painful. And so we had to help them retrain their brains from touch that was painful so that they would avoid it, to neutral so that it felt safe enough, to pleasurable, and finally passionate. And the way that we did this was simply step by step. They liked to take walks. They began by holding hands. They did foot massage. They did neck massage. And little by little, they actually began to retrain their sense of touch, which, as some of us understand, is much more powerful than words. We remember touch long after words are forgotten. This was necessary, but it wasn't sufficient. And so I invited them to join a type of treatment that I teach and write about and train colleagues in, and that is called couples group psychotherapy. We formed a group of 4 couples, very carefully invited. Here you see their hands, including Clem and Marie, in a photo that I took. And the power of a group is that a group acts as a hall of mirrors. So here's the mirror. And Clem could see himself reflected in the behavior and in the feedback of the other members of the group. And Marie could see the same thing. And at the same time, a group is extremely supportive and, of course, completely confidential. So that people would say to Clem, Clem, we know that you're considering a divorce that you don't want. That's so unfortunate. You need to speak up. You've withdrawn. Marie doesn't understand what you want. And then when he would speak up, the group would be very supportive and say, Clem, that's great. You know, you're smart. You make so much sense. This is really better. And they would say, Marie, when your hand is on a pillow, it's harder for us to feel close to you. And then as she began to relax and the couple began to move forward, they were able to say, Marie, when you're warm and you wear a beautiful flowing dress, we feel closer to you. It just feels right. And with this combination, this couple turned this marriage around. And if we ask them now, Clem says, sex is great, and Marie and I will never be apart. You don't even need to think about it. This is not a problem. And Marie says, I trust Clem. I respect him. He has my heart. He is my best friend. Now, if we think about what does this mean in terms of the power of love, then what we understand is that many of the social sciences, the behavioral sciences, agree on the power of love. Helen Fisher, who is an anthropologist and a neuropsychologist, tells us that to love someone, is our greatest human need, period. It is in our DNA. It is part of our genetic structure. We are born to love others. And if we take positive psychology down to the foundation, we learn that engaging fully with another person or with a world of ideas, but especially with someone else, engaging is the foundation of a sense of meaning, which is clearly very important in the psychology of well-being. There was a wonderful positive psychologist whose name was Chris Peterson. He died a couple of years ago, and he would say in every lecture that he gave, other people matter, and we are among the people who matter the most. Now, one of the benefits of my career is that I sort of have to stay on top of the research because I teach and I do these things. And because I understand the research, I get to apply it to my own life. And like you, I have had some bumps in my life. I have been the recipient, the unwelcome recipient, of 2 cataclysmic disasters, I call them. I have been married for 45 plus years to 2 wonderful men who somehow, between them, have been at death's door 4 times. My first husband was Dr. Judith Coche, who died suddenly of a melanoma at age 49, leaving me a young widow with a not quite teenage daughter. I knew that I would make it, but it felt like a cannonball had entered my stomach, sort of went shooting through, came out the other side, leaving a large gaping hole where the center of my being had been. One of the things that terrified me was the idea of dating for 2 reasons. One, I don't know how many of you are like this, but I hadn't dated in a quarter of a century. It seemed like a very challenging thing to learn. But even more, I had lost a husband. I understood loss. I did not want to go through it again. But I knew the same research that I'm telling you. And I knew that I needed to gather my courage together and start dating. And I did. And 3 years later, I met and married John Edward Anderson, who was sort of a perfect physical specimen when I married him. He was running an 8-minute mile. He was in great health. I still was worried because John's father had died of a heart attack, and I really didn't want to lose another husband to death. But we proceeded. That was 20-some years ago, and we built a wonderful stepfamily. So now fast forward 18 years and go to June 2012. We invited our entire family for the first time to join us in Stone Harbor, about 7 miles from here. And I decided that it was time for us to have a family photo for 2 reasons. 1, we didn't have one. But 2, John had gained some weight. He was no longer running. He looked tired, and I was really worried. And I wanted a record of all of us together. And so we hired a photographer, and on June the 9th, 2012, at sunset, all of us gathered at the Point, a beautiful place in Stone Harbor, New Jersey, and took this family photo. As soon as the photo was taken, we climbed in our van, and we began to make our way slowly towards the village of Stone Harbor. We went about 20 blocks. And suddenly John, who was sitting about this far from me at the wheel, said, "This feels really bad." And he slumped. And he was gone. And I thought he had fallen asleep. He had completely stopped breathing. We managed to get the van to the next driveway, which, as luck has it, still is the Stone Harbor Fire Department, who rushed out with very competent volunteers and started CPR. This is across the street from the Stone Harbor Police Department, who rushed out and called emergency services. An ambulance rushed in through the traffic. It took them 10 minutes, and they took John to the roof of Cape Regional Hospital, where a helicopter was waiting. A medical helicopter was there because Cape Regional has affiliated with the University of Pennsylvania Medical Center, which is where I teach and where we do our medical care. There was a well-known surgeon waiting, and John was flown up in order to have a stent placed. And we had about 10 minutes of relief where we knew that the stent was successful when an unknown allergy to heparin, the blood thinner, was discovered. And John went into a diagnosis with a whole lot of big words, which basically means that multiple organs began to collapse. The outlook was totally dire. Either death was likely to follow, or chronic severe disability, which I knew he didn't want. He was taken comatose to a private room at the University of Pennsylvania Cardiac Care, which is fabulous, where he stayed for 2 weeks in a room by himself. During that period of time, even though I knew the research, happiness was completely out of the question. I mean, there wasn't any way I was going to collect pleasant moments. That wasn't going to happen. But what I was able to do was to think about comforting myself. And our family is very strong, so we did a 24/7 vigil. This photo had been taken of us not a half hour before that heart attack. And you can see John's intelligence, you can see how connected we are, you can see the sense of touch. And I was able to say, if he is in there, he is doing everything in his power to come back to us. And that I found very comforting. Additionally, even more powerful was the sense of touch. And so after the other people went home, I would typically stay until about 1 o'clock in the morning. The night nurse was wandering around, and John lay, he's a big man, and he lay on his hospital bed like this, and I would take these 2 fingers, and I would just gently touch the top of his hand for 2 reasons. First of all, if he was in there, maybe there was some way that the touch could communicate that we were here. And second of all, if in fact the touch is that important, it is going to help him come back to us. And it is a huge, powerful form of communication. And what it communicated to me is that warm means alive. So here's what happened. About 2 weeks later, John woke up and said, in his South Dakota accent, "I've been to the other side. There's nothing there. Stay here." And what I want to tell you is that I'm going to fast forward now to show you that this also demonstrates the major truths of science. And what I want you people to do are 2 things. One, I want you to collect a series of happy moments. Well, you can call them successful, relaxed, I don't care what you call them. And the second thing that I want you to do is look at the hands that you brought with you today, please. Just look at your hands and think about what you want to do with them when you leave. What I want you to do is to think of someone or something that you want to touch, both physically and emotionally. And if you can do that, then you will join all of us in enlarging this circle of hands, because, as Chris Peterson said, other people matter, and we are among the people who matter the most. Thank you.